On my 65th birthday, I opened a gift that nearly killed my best friend and exposed my own son's darkest secret. The package sat on my porch that October morning. Plain brown paper, no return address, no card. Just 3 words scrawled in blue ink across the top. Happy birthday, Dad. Except I knew that handwriting. I'd raised that hand. I'd watched it grip a baseball bat, scribble homework, sign Christmas cards. I hadn't seen it in 3 years. Not since Daniel Turner, my only son, walked out my life and never came back. Inside the box was a bottle of wine. So rare it looked more like an ornament than something you'd drink. Deep red glass, gold foil label, a cork seal with thick wax. It gleamed in the morning light, like it was holding fire inside. But Daniel knew I'd given up drinking after the heart attack. He'd sat in that hospital room when the doctor listed all the things I could never touch again if I wanted to see 70. So why this bottle? Why now? I sat on the kitchen table. The house split into bands of gold and shadow by the blinds. The silence around me was too heavy, the kind that presses against your ribs. And for the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not joy, not relief. A weight, a warning. My name is Michael Turner. I live alone in a weathered cedar house just outside Nashville, Tennessee. The place creaks when the wind pushes through the trees, and the porch swing has been silent since my wife, Laura, passed 7 years ago. Back then, Sundays had a rhythm. She'd cook a roast. Daniel would come over, and we'd sit on that swing until the crickets took over the night. Those dinners ended quietly, without a fight, without a slammed door. Daniel just stopped showing up. First it was one Sunday, then a missed Thanksgiving. By the second Christmas, I realized we weren't talking at all. Silence, I've learned, doesn't rush. It spreads, room by room, until the house and your heart both feel empty. Daniel had always been distant after his mother died, like I'd become a reminder of everything he'd lost. We never had the explosive arguments people imagine between fathers and sons. No shouting, no broken plates, just absence. And absence hurts worse than anger. At least anger means there's still something left to fight for. The last time I saw him was at the hospital. I was hooked up to machines, the doctor listing every food and drink I'd have to give up. Daniel sat in the corner, staring at his phone, thumbs moving like the world outside that room mattered more. I told myself he was trying to distract himself. Now I'm not so sure. So seeing his handwriting again after 3 years, it didn't fill me with joy. It pressed down on me like a storm cloud. That bottle on the table wasn't just a gift. It was a message, and I couldn't tell yet if it was meant for me or against me. By late afternoon, the bottle was buckled into the passenger seat of my old Ford pickup. I couldn't tell you why I fastened the seatbelt around it. Habit, maybe, but something about it rolling around on the ride made me uneasy. I drove down County Road 9, where the soybeans had already been cut down to stubble. The October air sharp with the faint smoke of burned piles. The sky had that late-day amber glow, the kind that tricks you into thinking the world is gentler than it is. Henry Collins lived at the edge of town, on a small rise with a white-painted farmhouse and a porch that always looked like it belonged on a postcard. He was already at the door before I could knock, wiping sawdust from his jeans, red flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. "Mike," he grinned, "you didn't have to bring me anything." I lifted the bottle. "This came from Daniel. Thought you might enjoy it more than I would." Henry's eyes widened. "This is the kind of bottle you don't waste on just any night." "Then make tonight special," I told him, and I meant it. He thanked me. That easy smile was carrying more warmth than most words ever could. I watched him cradle the bottle like it was something precious, and for the first time all day, I felt lighter, like maybe I'd done the right thing. But that feeling didn't last. The next morning, my phone rang. The number was local, but not one I knew. "Mr. Turner?" A woman's voice asked, tight with fear. "Yes." "This is Margaret Collins, Henry's wife. He's in the hospital. He collapsed this morning after dinner last night. They think it might be poisoning." The coffee mug in my hand went cold instantly. Poisoning. She spoke through tears, the sound of hospital machines clattering faintly in the background. He was fine last night, Mike. We each had a glass of that wine with dinner. This morning he could barely stand. I said nothing. My eyes had already drifted across the kitchen, to the table where the bottle had sat, gleaming in the morning sun, like it was holding fire inside. Now, all I could see was a fire it had already lit, and the danger I might have just handed to a friend I trusted with my life. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Henry lay pale against the sheets. Tube strapped his arm, his chest rising in shallow, uneven waves. Machines beeped with a cruel kind of rhythm, as if ticking down a clock I couldn't see. Margaret clutched his hand like she was trying to anchor him to the bed. When she saw me, her eyes searched mine, pleading for answers I didn't have. "They don't know what it is," she whispered, "but they're saying poison." Who would do that, Mike? Who would want to hurt Henry? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My tongue felt heavy, because I knew where that bottle had come from. And suddenly, it wasn't just Henry's life in danger. It was a shadow of my son hanging over all of us. That night, back at my house, I couldn't shake the image of Henry collapsing. I paced the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under each turn. Something didn't sit right. I opened the trash bin, sifting through coffee filters and yesterday's newspaper until my hand touched cold glass. A small vial, no bigger than a thumb, capped tight. Inside was a thin dusting of white powder, clinging to the walls like frost. My pulse stuttered. I grabbed a plastic bag and sealed it, my hands trembling hard enough to rattle the glass. At midnight, I drove across town to Walter Hayes, an old Navy buddy of mine, who now worked at the state veterinary lab. He was the kind of man who owed me a few favors, and who wouldn't ask questions until the job was done. Walter frowned at the vial, tilting it beneath the fluorescent lights. "Where'd you find this?" "In my trash. Just tell me what it is." He nodded, slid it into a machine, and we waited. The hum of the equipment filled the room, louder than either of our breaths. Minutes stretched like hours until the printer spat out a sheet. Walter scanned it, then looked at me with eyes gone cold. "It's Jimson weed extract. Potent stuff. Enough to stop a man's heart, Mike. 2 grams can kill." I felt the blood drain from my face. The vial wasn't just dangerous. It was deliberate. Walter studied me for a long beat. "Who's trying to kill you?" The words landed heavy. And for the first time, I let myself think the unthinkable. Maybe this wasn't just about Henry. Maybe the real target had been me all along. I hadn't seen my son in 3 years, but when I pulled into the driveway of his Memphis townhouse, it felt like I was heading into a war zone. My palms were slick against the steering wheel, the vial's lab report folded in my jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. The porch light flicked on before I knocked. Daniel opened the door, his expression caught somewhere between surprise and irritation. He'd grown a beard, trim neat, and wore a press shirt like he'd just come back from some corporate meeting. But his eyes, they hadn't changed. Same storm behind him. "Dad." His voice cracked in the middle, like he wasn't sure whether to hug me or shut the door. I stepped inside without answering. The house smelled faintly of chemicals, cleaner maybe, but sharp enough to sting. My gaze flicked over the counter. Wine glasses, 2 half-wash plates, a cutting board still dusted with herbs. Too normal, too staged. "I saw Henry yesterday," I said finally. Daniel shifted. "How's he doing?" "He's in the hospital. Poisoned." The silence that followed was jagged. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I pulled the folded report from my pocket, slapped it on the table. "Jimson weed. You ever heard of it?" Daniel's eyes flicked to the paper too fast. Too familiar. Then he forced a laugh. "That's some kind of weed, right? Funny, I don't remember telling you what it was." The laugh died in his throat. For the first time, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He reached for a dish towel, wiping an already clean glass. His hands moved, but his face had gone pale. I stepped closer. "That bottle of wine, Daniel, why send it to me? You knew I couldn't drink it. You sat in that hospital room. Heard the doctor's orders. So who was it meant for?" His knuckles whitened around the glass. "You're imagining things, Dad." "No," my voice dropped low. "I'm remembering things. Like how your mother's medicine bottles kept disappearing. how the dog got sick after drinking from your glass, and now Henry collapsing the night after opening your gift. Daniel finally looked at me, his smile thin, bitter. You should have just kept the bottle. The words hung between us, colder than the October wind sneaking to the open window. And in that moment I knew my son wasn't just estranged. He was dangerous. The drive back to Nashville felt longer than it should have. Streetlights streaked across my windshield in pale ribbons, each one slicing the dark like a reminder. I just stared into my son's eyes and seen a stranger. By the time I pulled into my gravel driveway, the night was deep and heavy. My porch light, the one I always left on, was out. That was the first thing. The second was the front door, slightly ajar, swaying against the frame. My gut clenched. I drew in a slow breath, pushed the door open. The house was wrong. Too quiet, too still, and yet not empty. Drawers gaped open like mouse mid-scream. Papers scattered across the floor. My desk, the one where I'd left Walter's lab report, was bare. Every scrap of proof I had gone. The air smelled faintly of cigarettes, though I hadn't lit one in years. A warning, I realized, left behind on purpose. I stepped into the living room, my hand brushing the lamp switch when I saw it. A note, propped neatly against a family photo on the mantel. 3 words, scrawled in that same blue ink I knew too well. Stop digging. Now! My throat tightened. The handwriting was the same as the birthday package. But it wasn't just a son scrawl this time. It was a threat. I scanned the room again, every shadow suddenly alive. My fingers trembled as I picked up the note, reading it again and again, as if the letters might rearrange into something less damning. They didn't. A noise outside snapped my head around. The crunch of gravel, quick and deliberate. I rushed to the window, heart hammering, just in time to catch the glow of taillights disappearing down the road. Whoever had been inside wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know. And as the night pressed in, I realized the truth was no longer just dangerous. It was hunting me. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat in my armchair with a shotgun across my lap, the note lying like a venomous snake on the table beside me. The house groaned. The wind rattled the gutters, and every sound felt like footsteps I couldn't quite place. By dawn, I knew waiting would kill me faster than any poison. I had to act. I drove back to Memphis, this time not to confront Daniel, but to dig. If he wanted me to stop, it meant there was something still hidden. Something bigger than the vial, bigger than Henry's collapse. Daniel's townhouse was quiet, blinds drawn tight. I parked 2 streets over, walked the rest of the way with my collar up and my heart hammering. The back door was locked, but the old habits from my Navy days came back quick. Credit card, angled push, and I was inside. The place looked normal at first. Too normal. Every surface wiped, no clutter, no stray mail. Like a showroom, not a home, which only made the garage more suspicious. It smelled of oil and mildew. Boxes were stacked neatly against the far wall, all labeled Christmas tools, junk. All except one. A plain black box shoved half behind the lawnmower. I pulled it out, the cardboard soft with damp. Inside, beneath a tangle of rags, lay a leather-bound notebook. Heavy, used. I opened it, and the breath left my chest. Page after page was filled with chemical names, dosage amounts, crude sketches of plants. Some pages had calculations, arrows, and strike-throughs. But the most chilling were the lists, 2 sets of initials beside each set of doses. HC 1 glass. Fatal in 12 hours. MT 2 grams. Cardiac arrest within minutes. Henry Collins. Michael Turner. My best friend. My own name. I flipped further. Dates. Notes on behavior. Observations written like a scientist testing on lab rats. Only these weren't rats. These were people. Us. At the back of the book, a single line stretched across the page in Daniel's hand. Closure requires sacrifice. The words burned in my vision. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders, had reduced me to an experiment. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, my hands trembling so hard the images blurred. Then I shoved the notebook back and slipped out, the weight of what I just read pressing on my chest like a cinder block. I wasn't just in danger anymore. I was living inside my son's plan. The photos on my phone felt radioactive. Each time I scrolled through them, the neat dosage charts, the initials beside lethal calculations, my name scrawled like a target, I felt a new tremor shake my bones. For 2 days, I wrestled with the same question. Do I go to the police and risk them thinking I'm a bitter old man inventing stories about his son? Or do I stay silent and let Henry's fate become mine? In the end, I walked into the Davidson County Sheriff's Office with my phone clutched like a lifeline. Detective Maria Sanchez listened quietly as I laid it all out. The poisoned wine, the hospital collapse, the vial of my trash, the break-in, the notebook. Her eyes were sharp, skeptical at first, but when I showed her the photos, something shifted. This is premeditated, she said, flipping to the images. If this notebook is real, Mr. Turner, your son isn't just dabbling. He's planning. 2 hours later, officers raided Daniel's townhouse. They found the notebook right where I'd left it, tucked behind the mower. But when they brought it in, the pages were blank. Clean, like someone had swapped it for a twin. The photos on my phone became my only proof. Daniel was arrested anyway. Circumstantial evidence stacked too high to ignore. But the smug look on his face when they cuffed him cut me deeper than any accusation. He leaned close as they pushed him into the cruiser. You think you've won, Dad? Court loves evidence. And you've got nothing that can't be faked. The trial date was set within weeks. Headlines swarmed. Local businessman accused in poison plot. Father versus son. Courtroom showdown in Nashville. Every morning, reporters staked out my driveway. Margaret Collins begged me to put Henry's name on the record to make sure her husband didn't collapse in vain. And Detective Sanchez pressed me harder. If we lose this case, he walks free. And if he walks free, you know what happens next. I did. Each night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at that family photo, my wife's smile frozen in time. If she'd been here, maybe Daniel wouldn't have gone so dark. Maybe I wouldn't be standing on the edge of testifying against my own blood. But the gavel was coming down whether I liked it or not. And the next time I faced Daniel Turner, it wouldn't be across a kitchen table. It would be across a courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Nashville was packed. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of spectators. Reporters filled the aisles with notepads and cameras. And the air itself felt charged like a thunderstorm waiting to break. When Daniel walked in, flanked by deputies, he looked more like a polished executive than a man accused of poisoning his best friend and plotting against his own father. His suit was sharp, his smile thin, his eyes scanning the crowd like he owned it. The prosecutor, Elaine Porter, opened with fire. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case about misunderstandings. This is a case about intent, about a son who carefully calculated doses of poison and aimed them at 2 men, his father and his father's best friend. She held up the enlarged photos of the notebook pages I'd taken, the initials circled in red. The jurors leaned forward, whispering. Then came Daniel's defense attorney, slick as oil. There is no physical notebook with these entries. The only so-called evidence comes from blurry cell phone photos taken by a man with every reason to resent his estranged son. Michael Turner's grief has clouded his judgment. This is not proof. This is projection. And just like that, the trial became a war of shadows. When I took the stand, my throat felt raw. I told them everything. The gift, the hospital collapse, the vial, the threats. I spoke as steady as I could, but each word tasted like betrayal. Then came the moment I dreaded. The defense attorney rose, smiling. Mr. Turner, is it true that your son was at your wife's bedside when she died? Yes. And isn't it true that you often blamed him for her death, saying he didn't do enough, that he withdrew, that he abandoned you? My chest tightened. I never blamed him. The attorney leaned closer. Or maybe you did. Maybe this entire case is less about poison and more about punishment. Murmurs rippled through the room. My hand shook on a rail. For a moment, I felt the ground slipping out from under me. And then, Elaine Porter called her final witness. The room stilled as Walter Hayes walked forward. The Navy buddy who tested the vial. He set a sealed evidence bag on the stand, the vial glinting inside. This, he said firmly, is no projection. It tested positive for Jimson weed extract, and it came directly from Mr. Turner's home trash. But it wasn't Walter's testimony that shattered the silence. It was what came next. Elaine adjusted her glasses, glanced at the jury. One more witness, Your Honor, forensic specialist Margaret Collins. The courtroom doors opened, and Henry's wife stepped in, holding a folder. She looked at me once, nodded faintly, then turned her gaze on Daniel. Her voice was steady, but her words were knives. I found these emails in my husband's recovered laptop, sent from Daniel Turner's address. They detailed a wine purchase, delivery instructions, and even the words "Happy Birthday," Dad, typed out as a draft. Gasps broke through the room. Daniel's smirk faltered for the first time. And in that instant, the courtroom wasn't just about me versus him anymore. It was about truth cracking open, louder than any gavel. The jury was out for 6 hours, though it felt like 6 lifetimes. I sat in that hallway outside the courtroom, Margaret beside me, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Every footstep in the corridor, every creak of the benches made my stomach twist. When the bailiff finally called us back in, the air was thick enough to choke on. Daniel sat at the defense table, cool as stone, his attorney whispering in his ear. He didn't look at me, not once. The foreman stood, a slip of paper trembling in his hand. On the charge of attempted murder by poisoning, he said, voice steady, we find defendant guilty. The word hit like a thunderclap. Gasps burst from the gallery. Margaret let out a sob, muffling it against her hands. Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a smile that chilled me deeper than any verdict. When the judge pronounced his sentence, 25 years without parole, Daniel finally turned, locking eyes with me across the courtroom. His voice was low, but I heard it as clear as if he were whispering in my ear. This isn't over, Dad. Deputies hauled him to his feet, cuffing his wrists. He walked out as though he planned the whole thing, as though prison was just another chapter in a book he was still writing. I sat frozen, unable to move. The weight of victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like collapse. I'd saved Henry. I'd told the truth. But in doing so, I'd buried the last piece of my son. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, questions shouted. Mr. Turner, do you feel justice was served? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe it. But all that came out was silence. That night, the house was too quiet. The shotgun leaned in its corner, the note long since bagged by detectives, but their echoes remained. I stared at the family photo on the mantel, me, my wife, and a young Daniel with a smile so wide, so unguarded, it nearly split his face. I whispered into the dark, "Where'd I lose you, son?" The verdict had ended the trial, but it hadn't ended the wound. 5 years is a long time, but not long enough to forget. The Turner farmhouse in Nashville feels emptier now, though Margaret visits often, bringing casseroles I never finish in conversation I can barely keep up with. Henry survived, though his heart never fully recovered. He walks slower, laughs less. Sometimes when we sit on his porch, silence stretches between us, not awkward, just heavy, like two men holding the same secret. Daniel's name rarely leaves my lips, but it never leaves my mind. He's in Riverbend maximum security, serving out his sentence. Every 6 months, I get a letter from the prison board reminding me of his status. Every 6 months, I burn in the fireplace without opening it. But some nights, when the wind rattles the windows, I wonder if he's writing to me. Pages that never make it past the guards. Maybe apologies. Maybe threats. Maybe both. I tried moving on. I took up woodworking again. Rebuilt the porch swing my wife once loved. I walked the perimeter of the fields each morning, the dew soaking my boots. On the surface, life looks steady, but scars don't always show on the skin. At church, people call me brave. At the diner, they call me strong. What they don't know is how often I wake at 3 a.m. with the sound of my son's voice in my ears. This isn't over, Dad. Sometimes I sit at the mantel, staring at that same old photo, me, my wife, and little Daniel with his crooked grin. I try to remember him that way, not as the man in handcuffs, not as the planner of poison, just a boy who used to beg me to throw baseballs until the sun went down. But memory is a cruel editor. It rewrites itself in shadows. The town moved on. Margaret remarried. Henry found joy again in teaching high school history. The world spins forward. Me? I remain half in the past, half in the present, alive, breathing, but never whole. I used to think justice was clean, that once a gavel struck, the world split neatly into right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But 5 years have taught me something colder. Justice can punish, but it can't heal. I saved Henry's life. I stopped a man from poisoning again. But in doing so, I lost my son forever. The courtroom gave me closure. My heart never found it. If there's a lesson in all this, it's not about poison or police reports. It's about the small fractures that we ignore until they become unfixable breaks. I saw Daniel's anger, his distance, his bitterness, long before the wine bottle ever arrived. I told myself he'd grow out of it. That time would mend it. Time didn't mend anything. It hardened it. So here's what I know now. Don't ignore the silences of the people you love. Sometimes silence is where the danger begins. Pay attention to the details. What's missing from a room can speak louder than what's present. And most of all, love isn't just about holding close. It's about intervening when someone drifts too far, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts. I still walk the fields at dawn, the dew biting my boots, the sun rising steady over Tennessee. And sometimes I whisper into the morning air, Daniel, I wish I'd fought harder for you when you were still mine. The photo remains on the mantel, not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a warning of what happens when you let the cracks spread unchecked. Because evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the ones you love most. And that truth will haunt me long after the verdict fades.